Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Mark Brombacher. I met Mark through Facebook. I'm not sure when, but maybe sometime in the last few years,
Mhm.
we became Facebook friends, and I put out a call a few weeks ago for a debate or discussion with conservatives because I haven't done many of those on my channel. I've debated leftists a lot, but not too many conservatives. So I was interested in having a discussion with a conservative, and Mark was one of the people who replied to that. And here we are. So, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I'm looking forward to a vibrant discussion.
Great. Okay, before we get into it, how about you just briefly introduce yourself to my audience? Maybe say a little about who you are, what you do.
Yeah, great. Mark Brombacher. Currently, my career is in filmmaking. I'm an actor, screenwriter, producer, director for the last 10 years. And before that, I was a software developer for a number of years. Philosophically, I was actually not a conservative for about 20 years. I was hard libertarian, mostly objectivist, a big follower of the writings of Ayn Rand, and I pretty much strictly identified with her view until about 6 years ago. I became Christian, and which is, it's a gigantic, it's a gigantic leap from going from objectivist to Christian. And as a result, a lot of my views that were strictly objectivist and libertarian evolved to uh, I see things. I see the conservative perspective a lot more, where I talk to some other conservatives, they still see me as kind of libertarian Randian in some ways, but in a number of ways, I'm definitely I would definitely be classified as a conservative. So that sort of sums up where I am ideologically now.
Okay. Christian conservative, maybe in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so just to put a few issues on the table, when I put out my call for discussion, I staked out some of the positions that I hold, and maybe we could touch on some of these during our
Hmm.
conversation. So I said I was pro-reason, anti-faith, pro-egoism, anti-altruism. I'm against all taxes and regulations, and I'm pro-abortion, pro the right to an abortion.
Hmm.
So these are positions that Ayn Rand also holds, which I learned from
Hmm.
Ayn Rand.
Hmm.
And I would imagine that as a Christian conservative, we would take different views on a lot of these issues. And I think maybe a good one to start with, because it's so fundamental, is the issue of reason and faith.
Hmm.
So I'm pro reason, anti faith. And I don't know if you would say you're the opposite, pro faith, anti reason, or what, but is that a good place to start?
Yeah, it's a great place to start, but I certainly wouldn't say I'm anti-reason. I think reason is a human faculty. It's something that we all fundamentally rely on and lean on. Um, and for me, like it's a really tough one to even sort of explain faith. And the whole, like, when I was atheist and when I was objectivist, people would ask me, is like, um, because I always sort of admired a lot of things about Christians in much the same way that Ayn Rand did. She, on a personal level, she found them often to be like the less religious and less preachy ones, but she found on a personal level a lot of Christians to be lovely people and benevolent people. And I was of sort of that mindset. I was like, I would much rather have a bunch of neighbors who were Christians as opposed to atheist nihilist. Whereas not all atheists are nihilists, which is why I was an objectivist. Objectivism is a framework that gives morality to atheism, and that's what I always liked about it. And not only does objectivism give morality to atheists, it gives a feeling of grandeur of, like, in Ayn Rand's writing, she painted the portrait of man as he ought to be, reading about Howard Rourke the first time I did. It was the first time I felt exalted, an almost religious experience of a person who's by man's achievement. She was like it was uplifting in an almost quasi-religious way. It sort of fed that part of the human soul. And that's another thing I liked about Ayn Rand is she would use words like soul and exalted in her nonfiction writing to talk about, the human experience. And I think that speaks to a deep desire within us. Um, but where was I going with this? I was saying, yeah, like even then people would ask me, it's like I would admire Christians, but could I ever be one? And I said, I like the idea of believing in a God. It's just impossible for me to believe in it because I can't rationally and reasonably bridge that gulf. I can't turn off my reason. I need to see evidence. And like in some of the things that religious people would, that they would have faith in were not only hard to believe, but almost preposterous. That was sort of my view before. So yeah, it's like I'm saying, it's a big gulf, and it took years for that to sort of erode and sort of an avenue open up where I could begin to believe that something otherworldly is even possible. And once that opens, it's like, okay, well, maybe there's a tiny sliver that this is possible. My curiosity just sort of led me in that direction. Okay, what else is possible? Then I started hearing um, just cases among people that I knew, and hearing testimonies of people who've experienced something supernatural that I couldn't explain. And it got to the point where it was no longer anecdotal. And I'm like, okay, well, three or four of these things seem very plausible, actually, and they actually kind of make sense in a different way. And then from there, I started listening to Jordan Peterson. I heard his long 13-part epic uh, lecture series on the Old Testament, specifically the book of Genesis. And he sort of put a lot of things into perspective, that this is not just, a strange book written by, savage prehistoric desert dwellers. There's a remarkable amount of wisdom in there that's pretty profound. So I went from dismissing the Old Testament as to some silly old fables to then thinking it's profound, and then eventually to profound maybe on a supernatural level. So that was I'm trying to sort of bridge what a huge part of that gulf was it was those steps, me completely thinking it's impossible, then hearing plausible cases of supernatural, then to start actually reconsidering the Old Testament, and slowly from there it evolved into belief and faith.
Okay.
So
In this transition started, how long ago was it?
I'd say I'd say about 7 years ago it sort of started. I was having drinks with this frustrating writer, Catholic, probably, drank a little bit too much, and he was just frustrating to argue with, and he was just bashing, just browbeating against my staunch not rationalism, but just staunch belief and reason, and me dismissing everything. And yeah, we both irritated each other, but he eventually sort of got through to me on a few things of considering the possibility of things that are beyond natural, like supernatural, like the possibility of it, which Ayn Rand never really. It's not really the goal of reason, or it's not reason isn't, and science is not tasked with eliminating the possibility of the supernatural. And Ayn Rand even freely admits it. That's not our job. It's just that we dismiss it unless we can know it with certainty. I think that's the objectivist position.
I was just looking down here at this book, Objectivism and the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, because
Opar, yeah.
yeah, by Leonard Peikoff.
Hmm.
I don't know if it,
I've read it, yeah.
I'm trying to get it to show up. Okay,
It's
there you
strange,
can.
yeah.
Yeah,
But we
I've
see
got the
Leonard Peikoff.
background blurred out, and parts of the time you can see parts of the cover. But anyway, I remember I think it's chapter 1, he has on the metaphysics of objectivism, he has some things to say about the idea of the supernatural. So I was just going to look that up in the index, and maybe we can look at that passage at
Sure,
some
yeah.
points. Oh yeah, he's got a section on supernaturalism as the denial of axioms, defined relation to intrinsicism, etc. Okay, so that might be good to talk about. But first, I'm interested in discussing the topic of faith. So I'm curious. I have in my mind a definition of what faith is, but I'm curious to hear if you had to define what faith is, what you would say.
Yeah, so I mean, as an objectivist, the definition of faith that I always used was like getting just sort of believing without seeing and kind of trusting in something that you can't know for certainty. And there is definitely an element of that in the religious view of faith. Um, I mean, but faith doesn't mean, blindly believing something stupid, but it's not having 100% certainty and kind of, it's a sacrifice. It's like almost the way I would describe it is you have a feeling, you have an inclination that God might be real, but even the most devout Christians, they can't really know for certainty, except I've met a handful of Christians who've actually had, encounters and they're 100% certain, like what they've described and what they've claimed to see. That's an exception because that's, 90% of us have not had that experience. But there is, we can get to a feeling of like 70% certainty that we feel this is the truth for a number of reasons. And I see faith as sort of bridging that last little gulf and kind of, like sacrifice is a theme in religion, like Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, but faith is asking you to sacrifice your need for certainty, that last little part of reason that it's like, well, I'm not going to believe it unless I have 100%. And it's like, no, you're part of you has to desire God and to desire, you know and you have to sort of sacrifice, you have to believe first before you get revealed more later. And that doesn't sound very it doesn't sound very convincing to a science-minded person, but it doesn't work like science. That's kind of the whole thing. So in the rest of my life and pretty much everything else, when in business, in science, because I'm a coder and a software developer, and everything else that I do, faith just doesn't fly. But in this one area, it's where we're asked to apply it. So I don't, like it's probably a lousy policy just about anywhere else in life, in business and law and just about everything else, or using faith. But in this one area, I think it's acceptable. And the fact that a religious person can use faith in this part of their life doesn't invalidate them in others. Like I meet a lot of atheists who say it's like, oh, you believe in a man in the sky. Well, how can I trust you to fix my car? Or how can I trust you to prescribe me medicine if you believe in, and if you believe in, the invisible sky man? So I think in that context, it's acceptable and it's appropriate. Oh,
Okay, I'm just gonna adjust my sun umbrella out here to keep it out of my eyes. Hold on a second.
sounds good.
All right, I think that's better. Sunny day out here.
Wow, that's I'd be outside too if I was in Southern California. So
Okay, so one of the formulations you gave of the definition of faith was believing without seeing,
mhm.
and maybe another way to put that is believing without evidence. That's how I think of faith. So if I
Hmm.
were to give a definition of faith, I would say something like belief without evidence.
Strictly speaking, I'll agree with that definition. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if we go with that, then I think it's never a good idea to believe without evidence. And if it's a case where there are certainly cases where you don't have certainty about something, there's only a degree of probability. So
Hmm.
you were giving these percentages like 70% belief in
Yeah.
something. So in those kind of cases, like let's say it's a murder trial and we're trying to figure out is somebody guilty of this murder, and there's a continuum of evidence, or there's a continuum of probability. So when you have no evidence at all that someone has committed a murder, and then you assert that this guy Jones, let's call him, has committed a murder, that would be an arbitrary statement, to use the
Hmm.
technical term in objectivism. I mean, maybe it's used in other, not just objectivist contexts, but if you assert something without any evidence, it's just an arbitrary claim.
Hmm.
If, however, there is some evidence, maybe you know that Jones uh, has a gun and he's hostile to the guy, and maybe he has a motive. Maybe he knows that this guy has a big stash of cash somewhere, and you have reason to think he might want to rob this guy. Okay, well now you might say it's not totally arbitrary. There's some evidence, so maybe it's a possibility at least.
Hmm.
And then if you gather more evidence, maybe Jones's fingerprints were at the scene of the crime.
Hmm.
Maybe you would go on from saying it's possible to it's probable that
Hmm.
Jones is the murderer. And then maybe further evidence comes in, like you have video camera evidence and you see, oh, this is looks just like Jones, and he drove in the car that's registered to him or something. All this is caught on tape, and it gets the what evidence just becomes so overwhelming that you say, all right, now we no longer have to say it's merely probable that he did. We
Hmm.
can be certain that he did it. At least certain, it's beyond a reasonable doubt that he
Hmm.
committed the crime, and so we say in some cases at least we have certainty. Now, let's say along this continuum, like I was just using these terms like arbitrary,
Hmm.
possible, probable, certain. If we now try to map onto that percentages, maybe we'll say possible is when there's like a one, anywhere from 1% chance up to, I don't know, 50, 60% chance. Well, I guess it's possible subsumes the others. Like if it's possible, if it's probable, then it's at least possible.
Hmm.
um, but maybe you have to get up somewhere to the high part of the range, maybe 70% possibility that we would use the term probable, or
Hmm.
maybe I don't know exactly where you would want to put the cutoff. But anyways, um, at no point in that um, process would I ever say believe without evidence. I would just say proportion your belief to the evidence. So if you
Hmm.
don't have full certainty, if it's not up to 100%, we don't have the video of him committing the murder, then you wouldn't say like, or I wouldn't say, well, I'm 70% confident that Jones is the murderer, and I'm going to use faith to get me up to 100%. I would say, no, we just leave it at 70%. There's no reason to um, try to make our belief stronger than the evidence warrants. We just leave our belief at that status of being
Hmm.
probable. And if it doesn't become probable or enough, then because people, or at least in our system in the US, we say people are innocent until proven guilty, we maybe he gets off the hook. Um, but in any case, I don't see any reason to try to, push ourselves beyond what the evidence warrants to some 100% confidence about something, rather than just leaving it at the less than fully confident.
Hmm.
But there's no
Hmm.
faith involved there in the sense of
Yeah.
believing beyond what the evidence supports. Does that
Yeah,
make
and
sense?
and I think that's why the use of faith is inappropriate in pretty much every other part of life, like in a court of law, like asking people to have faith that this person is innocent or guilty. No, we need to see proof of that. It needs to be provable. But in the matter of, faith in a God or in religion, it's a personal thing with personal stakes. So it's not subject um um to the same kind of rigorous evidence. It just isn't. And you could ask, why has God set up the universe in such a way that he can be convicting, he can be 100% convincing to some people who've seen him and reveal himself to some, yet to others it's unprovable. Why has he set it up this way? Like, why is he hiding? Um, and it's a very good question. But that's the one thing. And I always, when I talk to other Christians, they sort of get into they want to get into sort of rational debates with atheist philosophers, and I tell them, you're barking up the wrong tree. You can't win. You're going to lose. You're not going to be able to use the rigors of science, reason, and philosophy to prove the existence of God. You can make some compelling arguments and even make an atheist go, "Oh, I never thought of it that way. That's really good." Is it proof? Absolutely not. It'll never happen. It's sort of, you might even be able to get an atheist to see, a certain percentage up there, but that last little gulf, it's a personal decision, and it has to stem from the desire of that party. Let's say I have an argument with you, and I get you, and you see up to like almost 55%, but that's not enough to convict you. The other 45% would fall upon you. You'd have to say, wow, I'm curious now, and I actually want to investigate and seek this out. But you won't find empirical data. There are some books you can read that'll get you a little bit further, but I find it actually sort of comes from a deep desire to sort of, want to believe. And of course, me saying that somebody wants to believe also implies that there's a little bit of bias. Well, that's confirmation bias. If you want to believe, you're going to find it. Um, and yes, that is the case. It even says so in the Bible, like, seek and ye shall find, knock and the door will be opened unto you. But as you would hear from, like, people with faith in their testimonies, they'll say they had faith first, and then later on, things actually do become revealed to you because you sort of sacrificed a little bit of your reason. Say, okay, you know what? I don't understand. Jesus, take the wheel. I'm putting you in charge. I don't understand this stuff. And then later, things will be revealed to them that's inexplicable, that actually convicts them. That does happen, and I've seen it happen. It's happened to myself. So like, I decided, it's like, okay, I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to have faith, even though the rational part of my brain doesn't believe it. And I was at maybe about 70%. And in the months that followed, I wasn't even chasing this down. I wasn't even researching. Things became revealed to me that sort of pushed me and made me a lot more convinced. So, that is a common thing that I found among people of faith who've sort of had to cross this gulf. Like, things will be revealed to you that make it easier. So this is all sounding quite mystical. This might be a little bit more mystical than what your audience is used to. But that's my testimony for that. So, and at the same time, I'm almost conceding defeat in a certain way by saying that, in a purely philosophical debate, I can't win. I can't win on this battlefield, and I'm kind of okay with that. But I want to, I also want to tell this story, as eloquently as I can, because you know, I think it matters. So.
Okay. So there were, I'm just making some notes here on things I want to
Yeah.
comment on. So one is that it seems like you're putting in, I get maybe you said as much in other words, but it seems like you're putting emotions above reason when you say you want to believe something, and
Hmm.
that's the reason for accepting the belief. In another term in objectivism that you could use for this is primacy of consciousness. Instead of taking existence as your primary and then conforming your ideas to that, you
Hmm.
first have some idea in your mind, and then you assume or assert that reality has to match that. So I want to believe that there is a God, and
Hmm.
therefore there is a God. Something like that, I think, is what's going on. And I mean, it's quite an open acknowledgement, it seems, that you're making. I think I don't know how many theists would grant that their position ultimately is just based on feeling, putting what's the Ben Shapiro line? Facts don't care about your feelings.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whenever I hear that from a religious person, I often think it's a bit ironic because it seems like that's what they're doing in
Hmm.
reverse. They're putting their feelings above facts and in having their religious beliefs. And it sounds like you were giving voice to that sort of view.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
maybe once it gets to that point, and the audience can decide, well, does that make sense to me? That I just at a certain point throw out my reason and go by my emotions? I don't know, like if there's anything you can do to convince someone if they're at
Yeah.
that point, they just have to decide for themselves. Is that what they want to do?
So I would say, um, I wouldn't have gotten to this position if I hadn't experienced uh, plausible cases of supernatural, either hearing about them from other people or experiences of my own that at the very least made me say, huh, I need to give this some more thought. Like, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but and I used to even sort of brag about this when I was an atheist and objectivist. And I said, I have never once seen anything that wasn't there. I have never experienced anything supernatural. And like, and I even talked to people like who've taken, like, who've hallucinated, or they drank so much that they saw stuff. It's like, I've drank, but I've never seen anything that wasn't there. So, but that sort of changed. I did have a number of, paranormal experiences that happened that I couldn't explain. I tried to convince myself and rationalize them in other ways. I was still an atheist. I tried to use science, and then I would talk to other people and they would say, yeah, well, what you saw, maybe maybe you were just a little bit hungry or a little bit sleepy, and you saw something. And I'm like, okay, good. So then I can push it out of my head and I don't have to think about it anymore. But I don't think consciousness works that way. I don't think you see things that aren't there, and especially things that seem to have an alien intelligence behind them. And by alien, I don't mean aliens from another world. I mean, like, when you're having a conversation with something or an interaction with something that clearly has an intelligence that's not your own. It's not my subconscious mind talking back at me. So I've heard, and I've talked to a number of other people who've had supernatural experience who seem like very plausible people, like they've seen a ghost, like a classic ghost story. There's a ton of them that I've heard from a number of people that I can just dismiss as like, yeah, this person's a whack job. This person's just looking for attention. But then you meet someone who's very credible, and they're not. It's not like them to tell those stories. So I might open this out to you. Have you ever had any kind of quasi experience that's unexplainable, that's at least very intriguing, and it makes you say, huh, maybe there's more to this? Is there anything that you can think of, or anyone that plausible that you've talked to that has had sort of an experience like that?
Well, there are certainly things that I don't always understand that I have an
Hmm.
experience of. One thing that just came to my mind is a rainbow. Like the first time you ever see a rainbow,
Hmm.
you might think, "Wow, that's pretty interesting." That's like what's going on there? A bunch of
Hmm.
colors in the sky. I don't see that all over the place. Or
Hmm.
that's a very uncommon thing. Um, Now, at that point, you could you could manufacture some explanation. You could come up with some idea of there's some uh, person in the sky, some huge being, maybe like a
Hmm.
human, and he painted the sky or something.
Hmm.
Or you could just say, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. I see it. I can't deny that I see it.
Hmm.
But as for what's causing it, that's just a question mark right now. And maybe I'll do some investigation later or come across some other thing which will help me understand why that's happening. But
Hmm.
for right now, I'm just going to say it's there and I don't know what's going on.
And
So I mean,
that's
I've
yeah.
certainly had experiences like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's certainly that's a good approach to any new piece of information. Don't jump to a conclusion like, if I see something flying through the sky and I don't recognize what it is, I'm not going to jump to the conclusion that that it's from Jupiter and it's another, it's another alien race. I'm not going to jump to that conclusion. It's like there's a ton of things that could be flying in the sky and, man-made or not, and I don't know what they are. So it's always good, and among other Christians that I know, I'm a lot more diligently, tearing things apart and, like before I believe anything, I always examine things from all angles. Um, but I'd say it's actually one of the things that's been a big delight. I'm turning 50 in a couple of months, but I'm a little bit later in my life that I got into my, middle age and later in life, and I've discovered things that are kind of wonderful, right? Like the world and the universe seems a little bit bigger. Like I love the certainty that objectivism gave to me, and I was satisfied with it. But then things became revealed to me that made me wonder. It's like, well, maybe there is more to the universe, and I mean that's an enjoyable thing, and I know you can sort of come to the conclusion that it's emotionalism, but it's not a bad thing. Like me, I took my time, I explored, what these things could be, what the explanation was, and I did reading, and I also, listened to a lot of testimonials from other people, and I was very discerning about it because I can sniff out someone who seems like a bit of a wacko. Um, but then I'm sure to a lot of people I sound like a wacko, but I'm used to that. Um, but yeah, so it's I forget if I was answering your question. Oh yeah, you're talking about the comparison to, like a rainbow. Yeah, but we
Yeah,
know
my
what a
like my
rainbow is.
attitude towards things that I don't understand. I was
Yeah,
giving a
yeah.
um
Yeah, but I mean, we know, but a rainbow is now repeatable. We can create one in a lab with a flashlight and a wine glass or whatever, or like Pink Floyd did with the little
prism.
triangle. But we can sort of repeat that. But the thing about the supernatural, but it's kind of by its definition, it's not repeatable by us, because it seemingly has an intelligence of its own, whether it's some people say, oh, these are just transdimensional aliens. It's just intelligence from other dimension. And I'm like, well, that's pretty much what the definition of an angel is, right? Or if it's one that behaves badly, that's the definition of a demon, right? So it's just something of a, you know, um, I mean, theoretical physicists talk about there being other dimensions and higher and higher and higher dimensions. And if they are higher, is it reasonable to think that there's intelligence that sort of inhabits those dimensions, and we like the way we inhabit the third dimension, right? So, um, and I don't know if anyone inhabits the second dimension. I've met some second dimensional intellects for sure, but that's my attempt at humor. But yeah, yeah, that's kind of my thinking about it. But I don't, for me, I don't think I would have been able to bridge the gulf if I hadn't, experienced some things. And it's nothing too mind blowing. And I don't want this discussion to turn into a channel where I talk about, like what I've seen and stuff like that. We'll save that for like a paranormal channel or something like that. But I will say that I will say that uh, you'd be surprised how many people who are of faith have stories of the paranormal that are compelling and not easily dismissed. It's just they sort of keep it to themselves. But if you press these people and talk to them, and that's actually one of the things I want to do in a future YouTube channel is actually, document as many of these stories and just listen to them, and just because, yeah, and it doesn't fall into the category of empirical evidence, but if you hear enough of these stories and they sound plausible and there's some congruency to them, becomes convincing.
Okay, I was just thinking it sounds like your belief in certain things is based on what one might call evidence. Like you say, you've had these experiences,
Hmm.
although they aren't the kind of experiences that are replicable, like
Hmm.
the rainbow sort of effect,
Hmm.
diffraction of light. Um, but they are based on something. I mean, we do have private experiences. Like I might have a headache,
Yeah.
which only I am have direct access to. Now, you might also know what it's like because you also have headaches, but you don't
Mhm.
experience my headache, so you don't know when I'm having a headache.
Yeah, it's nothing I can record with my phone. They're yeah, they are private experiences, like through revelation, or some people as their evidence, it's a dream, and like so their testimony is a dream that they had that's really compelling. And those are the least, because we all have dreams and we all know that they're creations of our mind. Um, but a lot of things people see, like they'll like see a ghost or an apparition. Mine is somewhere in between those, but there's properties of it that's a lot more convincing. um but again, it's hard, it's hard to convince people of that unless it happens to you. And the only reason I tend to sort of believe the testimonies of other people is because I've had some degree of experience it, and when I hear other people, I believe them because I've seen it. To me, it's empirical, but it's not quantifiable. I can't photograph it. I can't. That's it's why does it have to be so difficult? You know what I mean? Why does it have to be like, why isn't it repeatable? It's sort of, and I think it has to do with the nature of, the supreme being, God, or whatever you want to call it, himself, that he chooses when he's seen. He chooses when it's on his terms. So he doesn't want himself to be revealed to the entire world. He wants people to seek them. And that seems a little bit unfair. And it seems kind of, oh, that's a little convenient, but that's just kind of the way the universe has been set up. And it doesn't really gel with the objectivist point of view. Whereas politically, I pretty much agree with everything else about objectivism. Almost. There's a few things that I've sort of pulled back on, but politically, I think I have a lot of agreement. It's just, once you have faith, you have to accept, and I specifically, I specifically have faith in the Christian side. You can have faith in any religion, but I'm specifically Christian. That does influence and color a lot of my other uh, views that are inextricable from, a biblical worldview. So there are some things that I can't really, that are sort of tied to that make me more of a conservative than uh, a objectivist or libertarian, let's say. But
Okay, maybe we can get into the political stuff some, but I still want to stick on the
sure, yeah.
faith and supernatural for a little bit more at least. I was thinking so there are you can't discount something just because it's private. Like we were saying,
Hmm.
you have the dreams that you have, and only you are going to know them. It doesn't mean you didn't have them because someone else
Hmm.
can't have your dream and know what you dreamt about. Um, so, but if something is at least the kind of thing you have had experience with yourself, like if someone else says, I had this dream of whatever, I can believe that because, I've had dreams, even if I haven't had their particular dream. I have no reason to doubt that they had the dream that they're reporting to me. But maybe take something else, like someone says they've seen a ghost.
Hmm.
That I would put in a different category than someone saying I had this dream.
Hmm.
Um, why? Well, I've never had an ex experience. Well, there's a problem first, like of what is a ghost. So we have to define that. Like, is this like something that looks like it's wearing like a human who has a sheet on its head, or
Well, I think the
something
consensus on what a
something you
ghost
might,
is it
or
looks
is it
like a
just that you
person.
know you saw like some leaves rustling on the ground, and you're not sure why they moved because you didn't feel the wind blow. You don't know why the leaves were moving. So what exactly is a ghost? I think this
Yeah.
is maybe ties into the God issue as well. Like, what exactly is God? It's often said that you can only people who believe in God will give these negative characterizations of him. He's non-physical. He's non-spatial. And instead of saying what positively he is, like he's 6 feet tall, he's a man, which is why we use the pronoun he usually to refer
Yeah.
to God. Um, maybe he is a man in a metaphorical sense, but he's not a man with a beard or XY chromosomes. What kind of man is it? So when
Hmm.
you have to define the thing, and then the theist or the ghost believer um, kind of retreats into saying, "Oh, he's not that," or "He's not that," then there's what's that phrase? There's no there there. There's like, what are we even talking about?
Hmm.
And if we're not even clear on what we're talking about, then we're like before the stage of assessing whether or not something can be evidence for it because we don't know what it is yet. What is
Hmm.
the it
Hmm.
that we're saying there is evidence for? You might say like God has these characteristics, omniscience, omnipotence, but do those characteristics even make sense? Like if God is omnipotent, is he so strong that he can, create the rock that he can't lift, that old
Yeah, that's a conundrum. Yeah.
saying? Is he so strong that like is he omnipotent in the sense he can make 2 + 2 = 5? No, we don't quite mean that. I've heard some theists say he can't do things that are logically impossible. He can do other kinds of things, like he can work miracles. He can turn a stone into a Coke bottle or whatever. But then is that logical? You say he's not above the laws of logic. He can't make like 2 + 2 = 5, but is it logical to say he can turn a stone into a Coke bottle? If you have a conception of logic that applies to reality in the way that I think Ayn Rand's does, I think she would say, that's not logical either. Logic is not restricted to things like mathematics. But anyways, I think there are some problems that need to be addressed if we're going to even assess someone who claims like I've seen a ghost. First, we have to get clear on what the meaning of that is, and I think there's some real problems in trying to pin down a meaning of
Hmm.
these terms.
Yeah, I think the early theologians would probably agree with that because I don't think they really tried to define him other than saying he's so mysterious, he's unknowable. The things we know about him is that he created us. The things we know about him is that he is ultimately good. Like the term holy means just like he is so good and he cannot even be, and this is a negative, but he cannot be in the presence of evil. It cannot, he's unblemishable. So yeah, like that's using a negative of something that he can't do. He can't do evil. That is actually something that the old theologians say. And then, but then people will say, it's like, well, that's a contradiction of the saying that he can do anything. But I don't even really know if there's anything in the Bible that says he can do anything. He is, the all-powerful, all-knowing creator and all good, but also unknowable for us mere third-dimensional creatures. So yeah, I don't like to get too hung up on we don't know. And even the early theologians, they talk about this great mystery and how, we can't know until we see him. But I mean, just even we talk about, like, theoretical physicists talk about a fourth dimension and a fifth dimension. My brain breaks when I start thinking about a fourth dimension. I cannot conceive it, yet there's certainty among physicists that say it exists, it 100% exists, and here's how we know, and blah blah blah. But I think we can't really my brain breaks when it tries to think of the fourth dimension. What is the fourth dimension? Is it time? I don't know, something like that. But anyway, that's my brother's actually like he's got his PhD in physics. He can talk about it, but I just tune him right out. But yeah, that's yeah, I'm not going to, I've heard those arguments like, can God do this and stuff, and I've heard brilliant arguments of why that's not a weakness of God. It actually, but I don't spend a ton of time on those ones. It's they're more, brain teasers about, the nature of reality itself. There's certain things that are just too hard for us to know, that we just don't have the answer to. So it doesn't necessarily negate anything for me. It just means, I mean, the assertion of Christians that God exists, it's quite an assertion. It's and that's why I don't try to take the position of trying to argue rationally for his existence. I don't think that's a debate I'm going to win, right? I just and I don't think, I don't think, well, maybe, yeah. I think maybe for an atheist like you, that is something that's a non-starter for you. If I can't make that argument, then there's no point in starting. But for me, I found other reasons to explore and be curious about it. But to me, it was through, actual experience. I wonder if I should elaborate on a little bit about what my experience was. It's not going to get too kooky. Do you think that'd be interesting, or
Maybe. How long do you think it would take?
maybe a minute or two?
All right, sure.
Okay, so it's like I sort of hinted at it before that I didn't see a ghost, but it wasn't a dream. There is a scientifically well-known phenomenon called sleep paralysis where and I was actually featured in a documentary that was on the Discovery Channel about 22 years ago because of my case of sleep paralysis, which was studied by the University of Waterloo, was one of the most significant and compelling cases about it. And they actually used it to formulate some theories about sleep paralysis that are kind of scientific mainstream. Actually, it was like 25 years ago. So the mainstream science has sort of adopted this view, and it was based a lot on the research that was done on me and my experience with sleep paralysis. And for those of you who don't know what it is, sleep paralysis is a pretty natural thing that happens to some people, where when you're sleeping, your brain paralyzes your body so you don't flail around while you're having a dream. Well, if you're running in a dream, you're not flailing around as if you were running. Your body remains paralyzed and everything happens in your mind. Some people, they wake up, their eyes open, they're fully alert, they're aware of the room that they're in, but the paralysis, your brain hasn't unparalyzed your body yet. You're in a sort of a quasi paralyzed but awakened state. But in that state, people are still kind of in a dream mode and they will see certain things. So I started seeing some vivid, like what I can only describe as demonic entities in my room. And for the longest time, like I was talking, this was in the 90s. This was before the internet was out, actually, when I was first having these experiences and I was trying to do research and find out what it was. And everyone was kind of dismissive of me, or people said, hey, you should talk to a priest. It's probably demonic possession, blah, blah, blah. And then a few years later, the internet finally came out, and I had these experiences a number of times. When I went on the internet, I started researching it, and I found out that this was an existing phenomenon. But not only that, that thousands of people around the world were seeing the exact same entities. There's 3 or 4 major entities that people are seeing, and people were drawing them exactly the same way. So there was a congruency across the world of people seeing the exact same thing. There was a man with a hat, there's an old hag, there's a succubus demon, and we all described different interactions, and it was all identical. So not only are we seeing this, we're all having the exact same dreams, and the details among them are profound. So there was a lot of study done in this. But what the scientific consensus is that these are sort of Jungian archetypes that we all share, which I found rather dismissive. And for like about 20 years, I just sort of put that aside. I stopped having the experiences and I sort of put them aside. And I'm like, it's just scientific. It's all been explained away. But the more I think about it, I just don't think the scientific explanation for sleep paralysis lines up, especially the vividness of everything that I experienced during it, which I could probably spend another hour talking about that alone. But to me, that was one of the things that was just one of those things I couldn't put out of my head the more I dug into it and the more I talked to other people who had experiences. So that's an example of something that's to me was an intelligent, otherworldly, supernatural thing that was sort of that's in contact with a number of people. So I'm sure I'm curious. Have you ever heard of this phenomenon in that detail before?
No, but I like what's coming to mind is like if you describe this state as like part awake, part asleep, you're like half dreaming.
Yeah.
I can it doesn't shock me that you might have like see or maybe see in quotes
Hmm.
something that looks like a devil, a stereotypical image of devil, like maybe
Hmm.
something with horns, red face. But um, that doesn't really surprise me. I know, if you're not fully awake, then you're still kind of dreaming. All kinds of weird stuff can occur in
Hmm.
dreams. I guess the part of it that's more interesting to me is the claim that many people have had this kind of dream and down to like exact details
Hmm.
they describe them. So I was thinking like I would want to see the people draw like an image or maybe have an artist describe it to an artist and have an artist draw it and then they say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was seeing or very close,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
compare that like one person's drawing to hundreds or thousands of other people and see how close they really are.
Yeah.
And if they were very similar, that would be very surprising to me. Like if they all had horns that were like in a 4:3 ratio with the size of the face or whatever, and none of them were like wildly different, that would be very surprising, and
Hmm.
I would want to understand better what's going on. But I haven't seen this phenomenon. I don't know what the evidence is. Like, are they really identical? How
All good
close really are they?
questions. All good questions. So it was it was that was a case of something that I didn't want to believe. Like when I heard, the sort of dismissive scientific explanations, like, oh, they're Jungian archetypes, and you've inherited the vision of what a demon is from your family. I was like, well, my family's not particularly religious. They weren't. But but I just accepted it because I just didn't want to believe that I was seeing these things. And then I stopped, like it got to the point it was really happening a lot in my 20s, early 20s, and then for about like 15 years it was happening rarely, like maybe once a year I'd have an experience because that's actually how it works. It's most common and most vivid in young adulthood, according to the research. But yeah, and it's like I was perfectly satisfied with the scientific explanation, but then I started, I started having a few more experiences around the time of my conversion, and it made me sort of reconsider it, in the light of me opening my mind to, the possibility of faith and the possibility of the supernatural. I looked at it through that lens, and now I became convinced that it's like I personally became convinced through my own experience that it was too vivid and too real. I don't want to gaslight myself and say that I didn't see what I saw. Like I was like, no, I was there. It was pretty intense. And there was a definite intelligence to that part. And yeah, there are tons of people who've done drawing. I haven't done drawings of them, but since then, there's been, because of the internet and their sharing of this, the characters like Hat Man, the Hag, and the succubus demon actually goes back thousands of years in lore, but specifically the Hat Man is sort of becoming popular in pop culture as an entity. People are talking about him a lot, which is kind of crazy. But I was the one who discovered him, as far as I'm concerned. Um, but
Well, I would want to see like it to make sure it's a legit um like collection of data. You would somehow want to insulate people from cheating. Like, so get all the people together who claim to have had a certain kind of experience, and maybe like isolate them from the internet so they can't look up what, the devil is supposed to look like, or the other
Yeah.
people.
Well, there's tons of TikTok channels devoted to this now and people talking about it. And I mean, I call myself the OG because I saw this stuff before the internet was even a thing, right? So, but yeah,
So
I've
I
met some
want
other
you to
people.
draw it. I want you to draw it for me and send me a drawing of it, and then I'm going to show it to some random person who says they've also had.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, I think it's an interest. Like I feel my work is done here because I've managed to get you to say, huh, that's kind of interesting. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna make anyone,
well,
discard
I
their
don't know if there's
reasoning.
anything there.
I'll
Like,
admit it. You're
first,
intrigued.
well, if no, I would be intrigued if I saw people independently
Yeah.
come up with the same drawing, and
Hmm.
I was confident in thinking that they really did come up with this independently, and it wasn't like, oh, they've all had exposures to these common memes on the internet, and that's why they're drawing the same thing. I would, if I had confidence that they independently came up with these drawings, that would be really intriguing. But so far, I don't know that that's happened.
Yeah, I mean, apart from my testimony, which is, for me, it was astonishing because I saw it and I'd never seen anything about it. And then I waited 2 years and then I went on the internet and I'm like, okay, I looked up, I didn't even know the term sleep paralysis. I had to find out for it. And when I found it, dozens of images drawn, and also some of the imagery stretches back like, hundreds of years. Like, so people were seeing this long before I was born, right? I'm not that old. But yeah, so to me it was astonishing. And there's other people who have testimonies like that. But right now it's such a part of the pop culture. It's like saying, I saw Freddy Krueger, right? Who well, here's something. Wes Craven based his character of Freddy Krueger. I didn't know this until like much later after I was having the experience, but he actually based the character of Freddy Krueger on the Hat Man, a man who invades your dreams who has a hat. Because I don't know if he's experienced it himself, but he'd heard about this lore and this mythos and he was fascinated by it. So he made a horror movie that was, a stylized version of that. But I will say that the Hat Man I experienced was nothing like Freddy Krueger. I would have never even drawn the comparison until much later, and then I discovered later that was where Wes Craven's inspiration actually came from because he'd heard accounts of this. So, oh my
So
gosh.
I'm just wondering now, like, what is the hat? What color is the hat? Is it a baseball hat? Is it a hat with like a round brim? Is it a
Yeah.
sombrero? Like,
Uh, just one, not a sombrero, but like maybe a fedora? No, or kind of like, I don't know if you know. I can send you some pictures. I didn't, like when it was happening, you're sort of paralyzed and you see a lot of it out of your periphery, right? And you don't want to look him in the face. But he was definitely wearing like a wide, like not a sombrero, but a wide brimmed hat like that, kind of like the Undertaker from wrestling, if I could say, and sort of like a trench coat, long spidery fingers, and he's a real jerk. Is the other thing I can say about him. But yeah, that's to me that was I mean I've had other, but that's probably the most compelling experience. It really sort of made me
so I
rethink.
was asking for the details about the hat because that's how you need to verify this, that it's
Hmm.
legit. Like, because if you describe it as a wide brim hat and someone else describes it as like a narrow brimmed hat,
Hmm.
then we got a problem here. If you describe it as different colors, so if you give specificity to something, then you can use that as like a checklist to see if other people are
That's true.
having
That's
the same kind
true.
of experience. Um, but anyway,
Yeah.
I don't know if we should spend too much more time on this. We've so we so far we've been talking about faith and supernatural,
Yeah.
or allegedly paranormal experiences that might lead you to believe in a god, and we've been talking about like how to interpret that, and um
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
does
not
that
sure what,
yeah.
like, if there's more to say on this topic, do you have any other points in this general area of faith in the supernatural or paranormal that you want to go
Well, I
over?
would just say that that sort of opens the door to the possibility of the supernatural. Now, does that lead you to believing in an all-powerful God? No, that's a whole other series of steps. And then specifically, like Jesus as opposed to, Muhammad, like which path do you follow? That's a whole other thing. So it's, yeah, the only thing that I would say that this should at least open some curiosity to the possibility of, maybe there's supernatural. And that's what it did for me. But then after I said, okay, maybe this is possible, it was then years before I had made a full religious conversion, which is a whole other set of questions, because there's lots of people who are, like believe in the supernatural, like Wiccans and pagans and stuff like that, but they don't specifically believe in God or follow a religion. But yeah, that's about all I would have to say. It's just, keep your mind open to the possibility. And if a ghost walks across your living room and you don't have empirical data, don't deny what you've seen. Maybe meditate on it, think about it, and explore a little bit. Because I believe the universe is actually more mysterious, thankfully, than many of us would believe.
Okay, well, I do want to comment some on that before we
Sure.
move on elsewhere. So one is I think interpretation is maybe where a difference lies here. Like none of this, well, yeah, how do you interpret some experience that you have? Like you could have some experience and say, well, this is some evidence of the supernatural, and someone else might have the same experience and just say, oh, I was hallucinating. I had too many magic mushrooms, or
Hmm.
I was drinking alcohol, and maybe this is some kind of effect of that. Um, so how do you interpret the experience that you have? I think that's maybe where a difference could be in this kind of conversation. Like if I had the sort of experience that you are reporting, I might just say, "Oh, well, that was just a dream." It
Hmm.
doesn't make me think
Well,
there's something supernatural. But also, what even is the supernatural? So, are we gonna? Is there an issue about defining that, like there is an issue about defining God, where there's not really a satisfactory definition? You can only define it in terms of negatives, like it's something not natural.
mhm.
But what is it?
Well,
Um,
I think supernatural is something that's not repeatable, because there can be an unexplained phenomenon like a rainbow, but if you figure out a way to like the caveman didn't know where the rainbow came from or what it was, but the moment you can identify it and repeat it, it's no longer a supernatural thing, it's natural. I would say supernatural is specifically non-repeatable, and it's like it it appears, it reveals itself according to rules that we don't know. It's like people using
well, I mean,
witchcraft
we
think they can make things appear, but for the most part, yeah.
there could be rules we haven't discovered yet. Like maybe a comet comes by once every 500 years.
Hmm.
And I guess if you're a caveman living at the time of the comet and you see it come by, it's an unrepeatable thing.
Yeah, because
And
they
that,
can't control the comet. Yeah.
yeah,
But then
you only
again,
see it
as
happen
long as they
once.
know that it's related to the comet, yeah, then it's like I say, the moment that angels and demons are no longer, things that are not repeatable. Let's say we enter a realm where they're everywhere and they show up like, like they're your neighbors, then it's no longer supernatural. They're just your neighbors. They're just animals. Like, like a monster, like people would see a bear in the wilderness, didn't know what a bear is. They say there's a monster invading the village. But now we know that we can hunt bears, we can breed them if you want. I don't know. But and yeah, we can hunt them, we can eat them, and we can study them. That's no longer a monster. It's no longer supernatural. And I think the same applies to, it's angels and demons, we would say. I mean, depending on what you believe, but people believe that they're real. So they're supernatural doesn't necessarily mean not real. It just means we don't know how they operate, when they appear, and we can't repeat it, and we can't summon them, we can't visit them. We know nothing. You know, there's absolutely no way to, there's no way to scientifically pin them down, but there are people who have compelling cases, or, you know, maybe not compelling, but I think that's how I define supernatural. It's, if it becomes repeatable, then it's not, then it becomes science. You know, if, like, you know, we can have a conversation or an interview on your podcast with an angel, it's no longer supernatural, and it's factual. So
So I don't take that to be I don't understand supernatural to be something unrepeatable or unique.
mm,
I mean, because if you see, like you gave the bear example, you see one bear, and it, I guess the idea was it's supernatural at first, but later, once you start to see it a bunch of times and you see other bears and it becomes familiar, it's no longer supernatural. I would say even the first time you see it, it's not, I wouldn't call it supernatural. It's just something I've only seen once so
mhm,
far. Or, you know, you see a Komodo dragon maybe only one time in your life,
mhm.
and you never see it in a zoo or elsewhere, but I wouldn't say it's supernatural there just because it's only happened once. Um, I want to go to I was just looking up supernatural in Dr. Peikoff's Leonard Peikoff's book. I wanted to see what he said about it. It says on page 31, it's defined. Let's see what he says. Since I'm oh, here's the supernatural etymologically means that which is above or beyond nature. Nature, in turn, denotes existence viewed from a certain perspective. Nature is existence regarded as a system of interconnected entities governed by law. It is the universe of entities acting and interacting in accordance with their identities. What
Mm.
then is a supernature? It would have to be a form of existence beyond existence, a thing beyond entities, a something beyond identity. The idea of the supernatural is an assault on everything man knows about reality. It is a contradiction of every essential of a rational metaphysics. It represents a rejection of the basic axioms of philosophy, or in the case of primitive men, a failure to grasp them. Okay, he goes on. I'm not sure I need to, but anyways, it seems like here he's rejecting the idea of the supernatural as kind of lacking any identity. You can't really say positively what it is. It's just something beyond existence, beyond nature. So that's like, and if that's how he understands it, as opposed to understanding it as something that's not repeatable or that's unique, then I'm going to put up more resistance to it. Like, I'm not going to say the bear that we've seen one time is beyond identity. No, it has an identity. I can see it. It's a certain height. It's a certain color. It certainly has identity. It's just I've only seen this thing one time. Um,
Well, I would argue that the supernatural, you know, it just means beyond what we know, uh, you know, and the supernatural world could subsume the natural world. So I give the example, like, let's say, you know, like there's a fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh dimension, and even higher according to theoretical physicists. And what if, you know, like, wouldn't our dimension be a subset of the higher dimension? And so when he talks about existence exists, well, to us, existence, we're talking about three-dimensional existence, right? So that's everything we know and everything we could ever possibly know, because we're three-dimensional beings. And you know, and we're not called upon to prove anything outside of that. But then we hear physicists say, "Oh, there are higher dimensions," and then, like, they say it with such certainty. But even I'm a little dubious when I hear them say that they, you know, because I don't understand what they're saying. But I hear, you know, string theory people say that there's, you know, infinite universes, infinite dimensions. Um, you know, but, like, this is supposedly science. Let's use their model, and let's imagine there is intelligence in these higher dimensions that have the ability to create something that's three-dimensional. Just like I can create something on a piece of paper, I can create a world on a piece of paper that's two-dimensional, so to speak. But um, you know, a higher a higher dimension could subsume and completely contain our existence. So, when we say existence exists, we're talking about, by the way he describes it, he's talking about this existence. So, can we prove a higher existence? I say no, despite what the physicists are claiming. I say we can't prove it. It's not really provable. And but I also think it's possible. And I think that there aren't proofs in this world, but there are hints in this world to people who are curious that point to um, a higher reality. And I used to mock and laugh at the creationist point of view, but the fact that some elements of creation, I see elements of design. I see intricacy in a human cell that just seems far beyond that of accident and, the evolution of stirring proteins around for millions of years and natural selection. To me, just on, an intuitive level, it feel like I used to mock the creationist view that the creation shows elements of design. I now subscribe to that. And that's I'm probably not going to be able to rationally argue it. It's just one of those things that that I'm convinced of. And I don't want to say it feels right, but I'm convinced of it. Like we make judgments all the time based on, you know, um, based on the evidence of our eyes or in our ears and the intuition when talking to a human being. When somebody's full of shit. Sorry, I don't mean to swear. When somebody's lying or someone's being honest, and quite often we make the wrong decision, but more often than not we make the right one. And I think sometimes it's impossible to know anything completely. For instance, the question of some psychologists argue that we don't have free will, whereas Dr. Peikoff, he gives a wonderful illustration of how you can observe that we have free will. But there's other smarter people than me who say we don't have free will, and it can go back and forth. And there isn't really an answer. It's just, for me, the problem of free will is just observing everything I know, and you can just, and I can't even verbalize it other than to say that you can clearly see that we have free will. I don't need empirical evidence for it because I don't think it's possible to prove what free will is or whether we have it or not. And it's the, I just, so like I think science and empiricism are wonderful ways at coming to certainty, but even there, like faith can only get us like so far, like to 60%. Reason and science can only get us to 90%. There's not 100% certainty. There's always that doubt, but you kind of have to make that choice. It's like, do I want to live, in the Kantian universe where you question everything and you doubt reason itself and you doubt axioms and you're completely, at whim worship, or do you have confidence and say, no, I have free will? And it's sort of, sometimes you just make a decision about something because that's what I'm convicted of. So
All right. There's
that was a bit of a
got
verbal salad for you, but
definitely got some things there I want to respond to. So I'm glad you brought up the physics again and the idea of there being many dimensions beyond the three that we observe. So I think that there are problems, philosophic problems with some of what passes for physics today, particularly in areas like quantum mechanics. There are certain things that some physicists believe that I think violate philosophic principles, like the law of identity. Like some particle can be in a certain space as both a particle and a wave or something. And I think what is possible is something has particle-like properties and wave-like properties, and it can be a challenge to integrate, well, what exactly is going on here? But I think I'm not a physicist, so I don't want to overstep my bounds here. But my impression is that some things are said in certain realms of physics, which I think can be dismissed just on philosophic grounds as violating the law of identity. And there are other people who know more than I do who could go into this in more detail.
Mhm.
But I think there are problems of interpretation in certain areas of physics, like quantum mechanics, and there are valuable things we can learn. And they've used the field of quantum mechanics to create certain technologies. I don't, maybe quantum computing is one of
Mhm.
them. So there are things you can do, but how you interpret the actual physical reality of what's going on, I think that's where I would want to challenge. And I think this idea of there being infinite dimensions or however many dimensions beyond the three is one where I would say, okay, I'm very suspicious of the interpretation. Maybe there's something going on here that's hard to explain in a very straightforward, easy way, but it's an unjustified leap to assume there's 18 or a million dimensions or whatever. We
Yeah,
should
I
we should
think.
try to conceptualize it, understand, interpret what's going on in a different way.
Yeah.
In this, I was also reminded of there was a course. David Harriman was a
Mm.
physicist who, for at least many years, was associated with objectivism. And
Yeah.
he gave a course called The Philosophic Corruption of Modern Physics. And
Hmm.
I think in that course, I heard it many years ago, so I don't have a great memory of it now, but I think he argues that some physicists had philosophic premises which were biasing them, their interpretation of their own field in certain ways. They weren't just arriving at their theories purely based on the evidence. They had some philosophic preconceptions,
Yeah.
and then they somehow jiggered the data to match those preconceptions. So I don't take, there's some things that go on in the realm of physics that I wouldn't take at face value. I would be very um, cautious of
Hmm.
them. And I think some of the things you're talking about, like super infinite dimensions, is one.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's one of the things like I was sort of I think physics has got a lot of mysticism woven into it as a result of a lot of theories. It's like kind of anything goes once you accept certain premises of string theory. From my understanding, again, I'm not an expert in it, but it's yeah. So I'm not the like I do believe, I don't even know if I would call it a higher dimension, but I believe the way I would sort of frame the idea of the supernatural as a higher reality that's outside of this. And I was, throwing physicists under the bus because they're kind of making the same claim in other ways, talking about infinite dimensions. Not sure if I believe that, but yeah, but it's true. Yeah, I wouldn't lump myself in with the physicists because I'm a little bit familiar with David Harriman's work on that, and you don't have to tell me too much about the corruption of the sciences, right? Because I don't know where you stand on this, but climate science is basically, in my opinion, it comes to the conclusion that the funders, whoever's funding the study wants it to be so. I think it's very easy to see science get corrupted. That doesn't mean I'm anti-science. I'm pro-science. I don't want to throw science under the bus. It's just a lot of people aren't doing science properly. They're just coming to the conclusions that whoever funds them quite often. So
yeah, I do have a lot of skepticism about what passes for science in the area
mhm,
of climate science. I think it is very politicized these
mhm.
days. I think Alex Epstein has done a lot of good
Yeah.
work in this area.
I met him a few times actually in Toronto. He did speak to yeah, I got to hang out with a bit. Really great guy. So
Yeah, I think he's done a lot of good work. I also wanted to comment on the issue of free will because you brought that up.
yeah, yeah.
I do think there is empirical evidence for free will, but that would be introspective evidence.
Yes.
So just like the evidence that you have a headache, right?
Yeah.
It's something that you introspect and you're having that. Likewise, you can introspect that you are controlling your mind. You have the capacity to activate your minds or
Yeah, I
let
think
it
it was Dr.
drift. And
Peikoff who said that. Like, I listened to one of his lectures. You can actually observe yourself making a decision now. Like, can you record that on empirically? It's just done through introspection, which might not be satisfactory to some people, but it's certainly enough for me. I
yeah, so
have.
I wouldn't say that's not empirical. I think that is a type of empirical
Mhm.
evidence, the evidence of introspection. So I wouldn't
Okay,
say
that's
that's
good.
something that you have to believe on faith, because faith, as I defined it earlier in the conversation, belief without evidence. I would say no, there is evidence. It's just that the evidence is introspective in this case
Hmm,
rather than
hmm.
extrospective. So
Yeah, definitely.
I see we've been going for maybe an hour and 40-ish
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah. It's
I don't
been a
know if
bit
you
of a
want to keep
talk.
going or if you want to draw a line here.
I could we wrap it up in about 10-15? That would work for me.
Yeah, sure. Uh, do you want to go in any particular direction for the
Let
last
me
10, 15?
see. Um, I mean, if you want to talk about conservatism a little bit politically, I don't mind.
Okay.
But I mean, unless you want to save that's for a separate talk. But I don't know if I'm as interested because I think we're probably going to agree on more than disagree if we talk about politics. But I'll just throw it out there. I mean, if that's something you want to look into.
Yeah, sure. I guess we could at least make a little start on it. I did advertise my Facebook post as a call to conservatives, and we
Hmm.
haven't really talked much specifically about conservative issues. We've talked more on more fundamental issues of philosophy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, sure. I am happy to get into conservatism a little bit. So, if you want to focus on areas we might disagree,
Mm,
uh, so immigration is probably, or maybe that's one area where I would favor a less restrictive policies.
hmm,
Maybe separation of church and state could be
hmm,
another one, like on issues like abortion,
hmm.
contraception, or if there's any particular areas of disagreement that you might think, like, since you've been more of a conservative, you've gone in a different direction. If there's something else you want to talk about, feel free to raise it.
Maybe I'll start with I'll start maybe with immigration, whereas um, I think you know maybe I would characterize conservatism, and I don't like this term at all, but it's sort of a necessary intermediary evil in 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 being part of a mixed economy that we have. So I talk to people and they're like,
Immigration is a necessary evil,
no,
or what was it
conservatism
necessary?
in general. But yeah, I'd say restriction. I would like to sort of move to a society where immigration is pretty much wide open and people are encouraged to go to states and nations that suit them culturally and ideologically. But when you have the welfare state, and it's intentional, the welfare state creates an incentive for um, bad behavior. It invites people who don't want to work, don't want to contribute, but want to vote. And that's one of the problems with if we can sort of get the welfare state under control and the people talk about United States being an example of capitalism. And I'm like, since when is America, like, are you talking about, the mid 1800s? It was an example of close to capitalism, but still not. Um, it's not capitalism. It's a mixed economy. It's very socialistic, and there is heavy subsidies for all kinds of irresponsible behavior. And opening the floodgates of immigration into a nation, um, inviting people who may or may not want to work, And that's frankly what's happening. I'm a Canadian. I've always wanted to be an American. I would love to immigrate. It's pretty much impossible for me, right? But it's yet people are coming in illegally all the time. And I see, and it's not only their willingness to work and their desire to use resources, like welfare resources, which is happening. And of course, there are immigrants who are willing to work, are working hard, but you can't evade from the fact that enormous resources are being spent on illegal immigrants at the detriment of the nation itself. So yes, ideally we should get rid of all taxation, all regulation, and then immigrants could no longer, there would be no welfare state for them to take advantage of. But since we do have a welfare state, we do have massive taxation that's crippling the middle class. I see it as extremely immoral that tax money is being used for people who aren't part of the nation. So, I mean, should there even be a nation? Like the whole idea of nationalism. That's another question. The fact is, this exists. Everyone is pooling their money into taxation, and I see governments, and it's not even spending on immigration. Governments are sending billions of dollars overseas into foreign wars, and I don't agree with that. I don't think we need to be involved in all these foreign wars, and I believe Ayn Rand would agree with me on that point too. But that's what we have right now. We have a massive, massive welfare state, and until we can change the culture enough that it would allow people to accept the idea of less regulations, because throughout our public schooling system, from day one, we're all told the government is the answer to everything, and people grow up worshiping government, thinking it's the catch-all. So they're constantly voting for more regulations, more controls, more taxation, so we can tax our way to utopia. Until we can change the culture and massively reduce taxation, regulation, I am opposed to the idea of open immigration, because it's going to exacerbate the problem. And I think that's what politicians want. They want to create a collapse so that they can massively transform America into something that doesn't even resemble a constitutional republic. So I'd say ultimately, yes, I want to get to a place of open immigration, but I don't see it happening for quite a while.
Okay. I've heard this point a lot in online discussions I've had, in just like on commenting on Facebook pages. I will often make a pro-immigration point, and then someone will say, "Well, yeah, but they're coming here for welfare, and um, we don't want them leeching off our system." So, one place my mind goes when I hear that sort of argument is, what is your attitude towards the Americans who are on welfare? Like, is it only a problem when immigrants are coming to take welfare? Well, there's another issue of, to what extent are they living off, or to what extent is their motive for coming here to get welfare, as opposed to just to make a living for themselves by working some kind of job? I haven't looked into this much. Um, I've heard some people who are more favorable to open immigration say that these claims are overblown. Like, yeah, maybe there is some of that, but for the most part, they would be happy to come here even if there were no
Mhm.
welfare state. What they primarily want is freedom and the opportunity to live in a free country, or at least a relatively free country compared to wherever they're coming from, maybe somewhere in Mexico or Central America. They can have a much better life. And it's not like if you got rid of the welfare states, or if you took that away from them, all of a sudden their motive for coming here would be gone, and they'd be happy to just stay in Central America or Mexico.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we saw this, back before there was a welfare state in the 19th century. This was now more people from Europe immigrating than from Latin American countries. But before the rise of the welfare state, there were millions of people immigrating to America for the freedom and the opportunities, I think.
And
not
that's
for the
great.
welfare.
That
And
is great.
I
Yeah.
assume the same thing would happen today if there weren't so many restrictions on immigration. I think there would be many more people coming here. So I don't think there's a fundamental drive of trying to get welfare that's motivating people, even if there are some. Um, so th that's so that's one thing I want to question. Like, is that the main driver of immigration? I doubt that it is. I think they would still want to come here for the freedom and the opportunity, even without the welfare state. But then there's also an issue of like, what's your attitude towards the Americans on the welfare state? Like, are they just as much of a problem, or is it okay that we have parasites, American parasites, just not Mexican parasites or Central American parasites? I want to get rid of all parasites, all parasitism, and not having anyone uh, living as leeches off of other people. Um, using coercion to do it, right? It's one thing
Hmm.
to engage in private charity and seek out um, voluntary assistance, which I'm all in favor of, but what I'm against is forcing some people to fund other people's lives. I think that should be done through voluntary means.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I know I don't know about you, but I think many conservatives, they don't want to do away with the entire welfare state. They want some kind of safety nets, and they want some taxes, just not as much as maybe liberals or progressives, so-called progressives and so-called liberals want. But they don't want to get rid of Social Security, Medicare altogether. I think at least most conservatives. Um, so I'm curious where you fall on that. Like, do you think there
Yeah.
should be a welfare state, like even for Americans, or do you want to get rid of that, or what?
Um, I would get rid of the welfare state entirely. I'm a fan of charity. I think Americans, Canadians, I live in Canada, and I can tell you what a disaster, public health care is. You won't get many Canadians admitting to that. They take great pride in it, but it's truly a disaster. We have this MAID program where people are being, euthanized because of, because they can't afford to pay their bills. It's actually happening in Canada. They can't afford to pay their medical bills. They're just they're just opting, they're opting to just kill themselves. So I would completely get rid of the welfare state because I think churches, for instance, used to be, like hospitals used to be entirely funded by churches. Um, uh, People, we won't, charitable people, we will not stand for poverty, but there is, when it's taken over by the state, people don't give privately anymore because they're giving all their money and they're giving all their tax money to the state because they're promising to take care of the poor, which they do a lousy job. They'll do all kinds of things because they still want the poor to exist because it gives them, it's like why would they close up the wound? Because the wound is the impetus for them to keep um, getting more tax money. So I don't really believe government is very interested in helping people. They want us to remain in suffering so that they can continue to raise taxes and continue to regulate more. So I believe, yes, we should abolish public schooling. I believe we should abolish the welfare state, and I think private charity and even private enterprise will fill the role of feeding people who are hungry and educating people. We'll find a way. Like it's the state that does a terrible job of this. So when I say I'm against the welfare state, it's not because I'm not compassionate. It's because I know it doesn't work, and I know that the welfare state is actually a boot on everybody's neck. So, I want to get us to a place where, we can have open borders and people come to Western nations because of great opportunity to become achievers and chase the American dream, which I believe in. Actually, I believe in the American dream. I love the idea, and I believe it's real. If you have a nation where you're free to try things and free to fail, um, those are the kinds of people I want to invite here. I just think that right now, and it's like, yeah, it's you bring up a very good point. Do I have a problem with American people taking welfare? Yeah, I have a problem with that too. But if I had to pick one, let's let's uh let's fix our own problems first before we try to fix the problems of the world. And for now, I'd be I would like to sort of see things brought back to legal immigration, and before we try and have the conversation about opening the borders entirely. So.
Okay. Just a couple comments on that. Well, so one is I have a video on immigration on my channel, which I wanted to point people to. I think the
Hmm.
title is something like, "Are illegal immigrants bad, or is it the laws that are bad?" Because people will often say, like, I have no problem with legal immigration. It's just the illegals. That's
Hmm.
the problem. But I think the problem is the laws themselves. And there's a reason there's so many illegal immigrants. It's because it's so darn hard for them to immigrate legally. I think for many people, it's impossible. There's so many hoops you have to jump through to do it. There's
Hmm.
a woman at the Ayn Rand Institute who specializes in immigration issues, Augustina Vergara Sid, and she has some good talks on this. And she talks about her own struggles and challenges trying to immigrate, and how this can be a many year process for peaceful people who just want to come here and work, who don't want any welfare, people who just want to come here to make a living. It can be extremely hard or even impossible, even for those people to immigrate. So I think the problem is primarily with the laws we have. They're so restrictive. If we just ease them up and make it more like in the 19th century, where you could pretty much just get on a boat and come here and you're in. As long maybe you check them out in a harbor, make sure they don't have any contagious diseases, and then they don't have a
Hmm.
criminal record. There's no evidence of that, at least, and then they're through. I think it should be vastly easier than it is today, even if you have some kind of minimal screening. It should not be a multi-year process. And it's because it is so hard that
Hmm.
people now so many people resort to illegal immigration. Now, I don't think it's really reasonable to expect people to spend their whole lives or a huge portion of their lives rotting away in, some third world dictatorship, or banana republic, because they're waiting for, the bureaucrats in the US to get their act together and process their file. Um, so it's very understandable to me that people would say, I'm just going to take a chance and come here illegally. So, and, people risk their lives trying to come here. Tragically, I don't think anyone is risking their lives so they can get some handout from the welfare state. It's not worth it. But they want to come
Hmm.
here for freedom. And sadly, many people, they actually die trying to cross the Arizona desert or whatever, um, swim through shark infested waters from Cuba, maybe.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh yeah.
so I think we need to radically change our immigration laws. And I have a short video about that on my channel, but there's also, as I mentioned, Ayn Rand Institute has some good material on that, I think. Um, and is there anything else? Oh, parasites. I don't think everyone is necessarily a parasite if you're on welfare. I think it depends on your attitude towards it. So, like, if you're in dire circumstances and for some reason there's no other way you can support yourself, like you're maybe a refugee from a war-torn country and you have no way to get on your feet, no family here to help you out, you don't know anybody. Um,
I like that
and
there are systems in place. I just don't think the state is the best to do
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So
I
I'd like
agree
to
with
shift
that.
to sort of like,
So
absolutely. So
I just
I don't see anyone's, we've all fallen on hard times, we've all had ups and downs in our lives. And I think sometimes even us objectivists need to rely on the kindness of others, right? So it's, we're social animals. Doesn't mean we're socialists though. But.
Yeah, so I agree the government should not be using coercive power of the state to force people to help others. But I just
Mhm.
wanted to make the point that if you're getting help from someone, it doesn't mean you're a parasite. I think it depends on your
Mhm.
attitude. So if you think other people owe me a living and it's their, like, people are their brother's keeper. There's that line from Jesus in Sermon on the Mount, maybe, is it? I'm not sure where it's from. But the idea that other people are responsible for taking care of you and you're not responsible for taking care of yourself. And so other people kind of owe you a living. That's the attitude of a parasite. But if you're
Yeah.
just coming here seeking some temporary help while you get on your feet because you're coming from some war-torn place, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it's unfortunate if the only way to get that is through a coercive government program. I agree, it
Mhm.
should be a
Mhm.
voluntary program. But I think your attitude towards that assistance is what determines your whether or not you have a parasitical sort of mindset.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement of that. And I need to I need to remind myself of my Christianity sometimes because I flip back into objectivist mode pretty easily. And I know I'm supposed to be more benevolent, altruistic, but I know that I don't like that term because objectivism describes it as self-sacrificial, and I don't like to see it that way, but it's something that's difficult to avoid in Christianity. There's the words turn the other cheek are very explicit. Jesus says it and he's very clear about what he means by it, but we don't like it. Like Christians really struggle with that one. That's a real tough one. We don't like being slapped across the face and then turning the other cheek. We don't like being self-sacrificial. That's something that's very difficult for me personally as a Christian to swallow. It's very challenging, but yeah, I think as yeah, it's probably one of the areas where I fall short, or I need to be a little bit more, charitable minded, and remember the people who truly need it, because I've been in that situation too. Not maybe not quite the same, but yeah, I think we're definitely in agreement that entrusting that to the coercive power of the state is it's it always leads to disaster. Um, do you mind if I think I have
Yeah,
to wrap things up here, but
yeah, we can stop there.
cool.
Thanks, Mark, for coming on. I appreciate the
Cool.
conversation. I'm glad we got to have this conversation because I think we hit on some topics that haven't come up much on
Yeah,
my
I think
channel.
my perspective is going to be a little different than typical because I sort of came from a, objectivist background, and I don't think I scored any knockout punches here today, but I hope at least that, I said a few things that make people, think or a little bit curious. But yeah, it was very enjoyable having this discussion, and if you ever need me to come back and discuss something in more detail, I'd be happy to. So.
All right, appreciate it. And if anyone wants to check out my channel, it's Dan Norton 1 on YouTube. I guess you already know that if you found this, but I am looking to grow the channel. So if you haven't already subscribed and you like my content or it's interesting, I'd appreciate it if you consider subscribing so I can grow it. Once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I can apply to YouTube to monetize my channel, make it
Mhm.
even bigger. So want to point people to those opportunities. And I guess that's it for now. So I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.